allowed as agreed to in the presentation, and then we'll get into some discussion. Does that process work for folks? Can I get acapella style? Okay, so do you want to sit here, Dre, or sit where you are?
No, I'm good here.
You're good there? Okay, cool. And maybe we could do a go-round while you're getting your things together?
Yeah.
So let's start. Remember, Jamie, that not everybody, we got some new people, so what we're asking for is your name, where you're from, and if you were already involved with Move to Amend, and if so, how. If not, that's cool. Just say, just here to learn.
Jamie Canfield, occupied Bradenton, Florida. Not officially connected with Move to Amend, but looking forward to be so.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, name's Dan Mills, and I'm in Occupy Muskegon, which is about a third of the way up the Lower Peninsula on Lake Michigan, and not involved yet with a Move to Amend, but looking forward. Cool.
My name is Joe Hawk. I'm also from Muskegon. I'm with Occupy Wall Street, March Against Monsanto, and I moved to Amend. Not affiliated, but I am now. Thanks, brother.
My name's John. I'm from Occupy Chicago. I'm also here to begin my support and contribution to Move to Amend.
Hey.
I'm Jennifer from Traverse City, Occupy Traverse City. I administer on our Facebook page, and we kind of I work in tandem with the ladies that organize the Northern Michigan group Move to Amend. So every chance I get, I promote anything, meeting that they're doing, and when you come visit in September. So yes.
Kim Gear, also occupied Traverse City. I spent 31 years over in Europe, Switzerland, and the UK, where they don't have a need to fight against citizens United.
I'm Stan Riegel from Occupy Traverse City, formerly Los Angeles, and I am peripherally involved with Move to Amend right now.
I'm sorry, Stan,
I'm sorry, I said I'm peripherally involved with Move to Amend in Traverse City, but not super active.
Thank you.
My name is Jasmine. I'm from Flint, Michigan. I'm just here to learn.
I'm Oliver Harwood from Vancouver, BC, and I'm involved with Tinder Occupy, and glad to be here.
Hi, Mark Swall from Occupy Raleigh, not previously involved with
Ron Roper was Occupy Grand Rapids, learned of Move to Amend from there.
I'm Daniel Lee. I'm on the Move to Amend National Leadership Team from Los Angeles.
David Cobb, the National Leadership Team of Move to Amend. I'm from California by way of Texas. And now we're going to turn it over to
Andre. So my name is Dre, and I'm from Brooklyn. I was originally with Zuccotti in New York City. I met some people from Michigan, and that came to Zuccotti Park after we got raided by the police and we had no encampment. So they spent about a week over there, and we had found churches to stay in, a place in Far Rockaway, food to eat. Anyway, long story short, they came back to Michigan. Next thing I know, they called me. They sent me a Greyhound ticket, and they said, look, come check out Michigan. It's pretty cool. So next semester, I finish, I get a degree in occupational studies for HVAC. So Occupy has changed my life. It's only because of the people I met here. I was a hot mess. But now, I'm going to represent Move to Amend because I learned a little something. Move to Amend has credibility. So far, they have 116 affiliates and 306,000 signatures. So what they're trying to do is a grand strategy. In order for this to work, this has to be a people movement. This has to be a movement. Their initial strategy started with ballots and resolutions. We the People Amendment. However, these are not binding. This is not really binding. The legislation that they want to, the amendment that they want to present would be the beginning of really binding and changing the laws that they already created that corporations have usurped our constitutional rights.
What does the amendment say specifically?
Okay. Well, there's two parts to the amendment, okay, because there was an 1886 law in Santa Clara which states that corporations are people. So this is what the Supreme Court has based on their recent statement that corporations are people. So they based it on these two cases that Move to Amend believes they have to overcome to allow this amendment to happen. Santa Clara, 1886, corporations are people. So there's two different ways they're trying to confront this issue. One is through that, and 1976, Buckley represents the money is free speech. So that combined gave corporations the personhood kind of idea that they're running with. And they feel like they have to attack in that approach.
And those two cases basically laid precedent for which case that was more recent?
The corporate personhood case. Citizens United. Citizens United. So the first, in the grand strategy, there's two ways that we can educate people. That's what this is about. This is not like, let's just get this amendment. The only way this is going to work is if we have people and a movement behind it. And that's Move to Amend strategy. Number one is when you're gaining signatures, you have an opportunity to educate. To say what I just said and let people know.
And when you're trying to get signatures, initially it's to get on a ballot.
Right. So you're trying to collect signatures to get on a ballot. That's that's your prime opportunity to educate people. When it's on the ballot, that's another opportunity to educate the people, to build membership. They have been at it for 5 years.
We actually started in slightly before Citizens United in late 2009. There was a group that saw the case coming down the pike and saw it as an opportunity to do wider education about the thoroughness with which our system of government is owned by corporations. So we actually launched on the day Citizens United was revoked.
So another approach they're doing is through We the People Listen project. And what they do is they want to ask people, do people care about corporations? Open the dialogue, find out what people want and are thinking so that we can educate them. For example, California, Prop 37, the GMO labeling. When Coca-Cola got wind of this, and Monsanto and all of these groups, they poured all their money in, and within that 2-month period, they blocked that proposition. So, this is what we're up against. So
I got their number.
People feel powerless, and these resolutions are not binding. Move to Amend believes this is not the only approach, but this is the approach that they're taking. And this is from the experience of being a lawyer, Mr. David, and the language is against corporate personhood, and I had a concern because someone mentioned, well, what does that mean? That means like a union doesn't have voice anymore. We need unions on our side. We have to get them to be part of this movement. And from my understanding, no, what it just means is, as David likes to do, every individual has a belly button. And individuals will still have the right to contribute. It's just not you can't be a corporation that has unlimited means to give as much as you want. So basically,
specifically, the amendment would apply to for-profit corporations, non-profit corporations, and unions without exception, but it would not infringe on the right of individuals within a union to protest or contribute to any type of campaign that they want to.
So basically, so the strategy is the ballot and the We the People Listen project, and that's why I'm here, to learn how I can contribute.
Right.
Thank you.
Let me ask you questions.
You can, with the understanding that at any moment Daniel and I
Yeah.
might step in.
Yeah,
So.
Can you give me an example of specifically how a corporation gets the right that really should be only an individual's right? A specific incident of how that actually goes down?
Yeah, let's go back to 1886.
No, well, I know.
Well, you mean a specific.
I want a specific incident that shows how a corporation is taking advantage of the current of today.
Well, here's our corporate president timeline that Dave's going to roll out. But just to start, to bring things up to recent events, the fertilizer explosion in West Texas, or the Deepwater Horizon accident on the Gulf Coast, were basically caused by the fact that those facilities weren't properly inspected. And a lot of times in the past, corporations have used the rights that we assert against illegal search and seizure to basically be tipped off if there is an inspection. So they can't be randomly inspected, and there are documented cases on our website. If you just go to our website, mutualend.org, and type in how do corporations use rights, a couple forms will come up to cite specific cases. But basically, inspections are supposed to be random, but corporations assert this right against unreasonable search and seizure, so they're tipped off. So when they're actually inspected, it's like, they just cleaned up everything for that day. Then you all the nuclear waste over here, and accidents like the horrible fertilizer explosion in Texas, the Maxi coal mine disaster, Deepwater Horizon happen on a regular basis.
So there is.
That's great.
That is
That's
a
great.
perfect specific example, and I'm going to ask if you'll hold on there.
Yeah.
Right? And Daniel, if you'll just grab like someone as I go.
How do you like this?
Back over.
Wow.
All right.
So is this addressing my question?
Yes. This is literally addressing your question.
Wow. This is on your website
This
too.
This is on the website. It's available both in print form and narrative form. It's also available where you can print it out in both one or second large, and you can order these from us as well.
Okay. Wow.
Ricky Ott presented this on Wednesday.
Who did?
Dr. Ricky.
Oh, I got it.
The point that I'm making here is not that it's time for, in 1 hour, an entire session on the history of the United States Constitution, but to just point out to you that there is case after case after case after case. On this timeline, you'll see decisions where times where corporations gain or lose rights and powers. Then you'll have where people gain or lose rights and powers. It starts in 1772, even before the American Revolution. What is the very last case? I don't know which one I grabbed.
2011.
Walmart versus Dukes.
All right. So this doesn't even, the thing is, like, we could start with, sadly, until we start to win.
Yeah.
This is the thing. And the point I want to make about this is, number one, that every time corporations gain, quote, rights, it's from a court decision where 5 or 6 members of the U.S. Supreme Court just grant them more, quote, rights. The only time people ever actually gain rights is because of broad social movements. Mm-hmm. Yes, the courts can sometimes have a role to play. Brown versus Board of Education. After the fact, right? Thank you, Daniel, because let me ask this. Somebody, quick pop quiz. I mentioned Brown versus Board of Education. So, who is Thurgood Marshall?
U.S. Supreme Court Justice.
The first African American on the U.S. Supreme Court. And?
Before that.
He was an advocate. Specifically, Thurgood Marshall was the lawyer who argued Brown versus Board of Education that overturned 50 years of Jim Crow segregation laws. So pop quiz. Who believes that Thurgood Marshall thought of a new legal argument that nobody had ever thought of before? Anybody? Who thinks that Thurgood Marshall was such a brilliant orator that he convinced 9 racist Supreme Court justices to completely change their worldview? Anybody?
Nope.
Who here thinks that actually the Brown versus Board of Education decision was issued by the Supreme Court, argued by Thurgood Marshall, because Thurgood Marshall and hundreds of thousands of other people had spent 20 years of organizing and educating through the NAACP, the Anti-Defamation League, right? Social movements are what actually make changes.
Good.
And that's what Move to Amend understands. We want to engage a social movement that begins the process of educating ourselves about how this doctrine known as corporate constitutional rights and money is speech have stolen our sacred right to self-government.
Good.
So when you ask me, Jamie, some examples,
Yeah.
well,
You know, that question didn't come up yet, last session.
No, it didn't.
But this is fantastic, you know, because you need ammunition. And this is ammunition, you know.
Things are great too.
You can just go to our website and type in corporate personhood timeline and it should come right up.
Yeah. Is the situation that you described on this?
No.
No.
no, because that's a different example. I mean, like, Daniel took some very concrete examples of disasters and very quickly and easily tied them in to the corrupting influence of money in elections and the extraordinary power of corporations. But I think what Daniel will agree to is that's not directly an example of a court overturning a decision, right?
No, but it's...
These are.
But it's a result thereof.
It's a result of their
But you'll see
decision.
1886 on here, that should be top two.
What's that?
1886 decision is going to be on here.
Yeah, and Buckley versus Vallejo is on
Yeah.
there.
1976.
And Dartmouth College and Citizens United.
And the point I'm making is this, that I wanted y'all to have a sense of this. Like Daniel, others are able to talk about this, but I really want to underscore you don't need to know this level of history. Now, for Jamie, who wants it, great. We want to give you all the tools, all the strategies, all the talking points, and so forth. But please don't feel like don't be intimidated by the complexity. Learn to use your own voice to say, I'll tell you what, corporations don't have any constitutional rights. They shouldn't be able to overturn any damn law, period.
And one of the things that I forgot to mention last time when I was talking about what we went through in Los Angeles and how everyone sort of learned how corporate personhood really affects them from a personal POV, and that's what we used at City Hall. That's more effective when you're talking to people on the street. You can quote cases, you can, like the cases that are good to know are, Santa Clara County, 1886, Buckley versus Vallejo and Citizens United, but you can quote cases to people all you want, and, it won't really mean anything. The people that you run into that want you to quote cases are either disingenuous or they're lawyers, like David over here.
Or not like me.
But a lot of times when people try to get you into like that type of dance, they're really just wasting your time. Like the real way to communicate to people the seriousness of this issue is to personalize it, and that's much more effective.
Can I personalize it? In my
We can
community?
see would anybody else like to make a comment or ask a question?
I want to hear examples of personalizing it.
Okay, cool. So, yes.
In Manatee County in Florida, we had this developer that wanted to develop this big piece of land that had a waterfront on our national estuary. Okay, and we were able to defeat his request for a map amendment, but. And there were public hearings in which you could talk, and I talked, and one of the things I said was, be careful, because this is corporate personhood rearing its ugly head here in my county, and I was referring to the fact that there was lawyers up on the commission telling the commissioners that they couldn't do things because they were going to get sued by the developer for loss of future profits if he was denied the opportunity to do the development.
And that's a beautiful example. We also have a couple instances of corporations using the takings clause, basically, that is reserved for humans, to basically get free money from us when they were going to do like some type of development on protected land or pollute our water. If it affects their profit, they claim their rights as a person to be compensated for that.
Right, and just quickly to elaborate, the other thing is that the lawyers were telling the commissioners was that he was going to sue the commission for denying his property rights to put docks in our estuary, because everybody else had docks in their estuaries. So he was using property, my right to develop my property as an individual right that we were going to deny him thereof.
That's what's going on in Muskegon, too.
There's just an interesting case in Canada that just was in the news a couple of weeks ago. Canada deregulated or did not renew the patents of a pharmaceutical company that had a patent for a couple drugs, so now they can be produced generically, a lot cheaper.
Yeah.
And so now that company is suing the federal government in Canada because they're only going to make $4 billion profit this year, and they usually make $6 billion. So they're suing the Canadian government for the additional $2 billion, while they're already making $4 billion profit.
So is that an example of corporate personhood?
Greed.
That's in Canada. Well, we have the same deal. It's just not interesting.
Yeah, it's just that Harper instead of Obama.
Right.
So in terms of teachbacks, anybody else who was with us the first time, can you think of any things that Andre missed that you might want to share with the new people?
Go ahead. You're ready to say something, go.
I kind of like that little history thing that you did up front. So,
do you want to try to share that with us?
Or you can either use the visual or you can just talk.
Yeah, Mark, do it. Come on, buddy.
Take off your skirt and get off your
Thank you, Daniel. That was exactly what we should do.
Yeah, thanks.
Something about the U.S. Constitution?
By the way, the timeline's really interesting. The Clean Air, Clean Water Acts, things that kind of happened in the 50s and 60s and 70s. Guess when ALEC was formed? 1973. Because they realized they were losing the battle to Nader. Remember Ralph Nader?
Yeah.
Right? So that's when ALEC formed. And now we have 40 years of ALEC. It's been organizing for 40 years, and we've been organizing for 2.
Yeah.
So we have a lot to catch up to do, but that's what's the right. Right, sorry.
There it is.
I can't wait to get this plugged into my network. I'm going to run with this.
Well, so the little history thing that David did, I thought was really interesting, right? What's the foundation for the United States?
It's the law of the land.
Right. What's the basis for our laws? Constitution, right? What are the first three words in the Constitution?
We the people.
We the people, right? So we the people on one side. What's on the other side of we the people? Our government, right? So our government gets its power from we the people. Okay, we've kind of delegated that to our government.
No, we've
representative
abandoned
government,
it.
right? Whether good or bad, we have representative government, right? So we've delegated that authority to them. Okay, some of it anyway, right? Now, as people in the Constitution, we are free and sovereign. Remember those words? Yes, sir. Free and sovereign is within the Constitution. Yeah, we'll get there.
Yeah. He's doing a teach back right now.
Yeah.
You're right. We'll get there. So we got we the people, and we're free and sovereign according to the Constitution. Now, kind of peripheral to that then is government. So there's kind of the people side of this and the government side of this. Okay. So we're supposed to be free and sovereign, right? Individual rights. Okay. The government doesn't really have individual rights. It's got rights that we've delegated to it, which means that it's really subordinate and needs to be accountable to us, the people.
Does the government have rights?
Sorry?
Does the government have rights?
No.
Duties.
Duties. Right. Yeah, I was getting there. Right. So we have rights as built into the Bill of Rights and the Constitution, and the government's got duties. These are the things it's supposed to be doing on our behalf. We've delegated to them on our behalf, right? But they need to be subordinate and accountable to us. Now, you're right, that's not working so well, right? So we've got the people side of this, and we've got the government side of this.
I'll just interject that our rights are really inalienable and they're inherent, and so they aren't ordained by the government, that they just come in.
That's
kind of the point of this, right? As individuals with belly buttons, I forget who brought that up, right? We have built-in rights. That was what's kind of framed in the Bill of Rights and the Constitution.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
What rights does the government have? What is the government's job?
Government's job is to...
Well, because this is a teach back, I want us to actually hold any questions or comments until he's done.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
because I don't know. So now let's talk about corporations. So we talked about people and governments. Kind of this third elephant in the room is corporations. Okay, how does a corporation form? Right? They go to their government. They say, I want to form an entity called ABC Corp. Right? And they probably pay a fee to the government, to a government, a state government or whatever. Right? So they're already working down this path. So the government, they get authorization from the government based on the rules that have been established by the government. You know, you fill in this form, you pay this much money, etc. Right? And it used to be that when this happened, the government said, okay, tell me what you're going to do as a corporation. Well, I'm going to sell potatoes. Okay? So that was their duty. And they signed up to do that. And it used to be that that was limited. And it was limited to like a 10-year, usually around a 10-year span. At 10 years, they were done. If they sold tomatoes, then they went beyond their duties. That could be canceled. It could be terminated. Can you imagine that happening today, right? So the duty is all set. So all this is happening on the government side of things. So a corporation really has nothing to do. They don't have belly buttons, right? They don't have any of this. They're not free or sovereign. They're all subordinate to the government. They're on this side of the ledger. What these Supreme Court decisions have made is they've turned that around and they said, no. When they say people, they're really talking corporations too. That makes no sense.
No.
Crazy, man.
Yes, sir. Yeah, the people, so people make up government too, right? People, it's still belly buttons, right? So that was kind of the point raised earlier about the unions. Yeah, the amendment won't allow a union organization to make donations, but the people within the union can make donations. The corporation can't make donations, but the people within the corporation can make donations, right? We want donations to campaigns or whatever.
Good, thanks. And the same just to piggyback on what you said, like not just donations, like the people within a corporation can have individual rights, like we talked about, like the rights against unreasonable search and seizure, like the takings rights, free speech. But corporations should not have those same rights. And in a lot of ways, another example, probably the easiest example to say how have corporations been using our rights. A lot of corporations, I don't even know if I should even go into examples, but they claim the First Amendment right to free speech so they can lie to you. So they can tell you about their product and how great it is and how fat-free it is.
The Nike versus Caskey, if you want to do that one, that's a good one because, so since you invite that one, that there is the First Amendment, which is really, but, oops, rats, there's water. So, can we grab, can I get?
I'll take care of that.
Thank you so much, Joe. Thank you. The First Amendment is considered by many to be the sort of the bedrock constitutional right, the ability to talk and to think and the idea of expression, right? So there was a activist named Mark Caskey. We worked with him, who brought a lawsuit against Nike in the state of California under the California law forbidding deceptive trade practices. Why? Because he said, because of activists like me in the global justice movement, we have made it clear that Nike is engaging in sweatshop labor, their market share is suffering, and so forth. And so rather than address the sweatshop conditions, Nike engaged in a multi-million-dollar marketing campaign to say, we don't engage in sweatshops, and we're groovy, and da-da-da-da-da. And Mark Caskey argued, that's a lie. And rather than the case going to trial for, thank you so much, Joe, for a decision on the merits, like to investigate factually whether or not Nike lied, or under the California State Deceptive Trade Practices Act law, Nike argued that they had a First Amendment right to political expression, that this was a political issue as well as a moral one, right? And so that as a result, they argued that the application of the California state law forbidding deception was an illegitimate stripping of corporate constitutional rights. Now, on our thing, on our website and on that case, we sort of nailed down what that means. Now think about it. The California law forbidding deceptive trade practices is subject to being overturned. Now, what does that not only say about that law, but now what happens to future laws? Jamie did a great job of talking about how local governments can be intimidated around developing decisions. So it's not just that laws get overturned, which they do, but the chilling effect of efforts, I see your hand, Ron, the chilling effect that prevents other laws that need to be enacted, legislators won't make at the local or state level because they know not only will it be overturned, but the courts will impose fines on us and it'll be tax dollars to actually pay it. So we either have to knuckle down or rise up, and that's how the Ammend looks at it.
Okay. It was overturned?
Yes.
The judge agreed to that?
Correct. 2007?
So did that be challenged?
Well, it went all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. Mark Caskey settled out of court for attorney's fees and some minor concession. So you can challenge things, but ultimately we're right up against the doctrine.
Settled out of court, which means what with respect to the issue?
Didn't go to Supreme Court.
It didn't go to the Supreme Court. It went to the federal courts, which upheld it. There's this federal district court, then appellate court.
It already appealed once. It was upheld.
Correct. It was pending in the U.S. Supreme Court. I see your hand. It was pending in the U.S. Supreme Court, and then Mark Caskey settled it out of case.
What was this before or after the decision regarding? This is before the law.
Correct.
Really?
How about that?
How
Again,
about
if you think that Citizens United began this problem, there is just some education. Right? Yes, sir.
Are you saying corporations shouldn't have the same rights as people?
That is correct.
Okay. If corporations didn't have the same rights as people, we still have war, poverty, crime, and disease.
I don't know how to.
Those questions aren't connected.
I don't. Yes.
Well,
no, that's not true. With all due respect,
politics. The fact that where they can buy your politicians.
So if y'all want to take that one-on-one, that process is take it back and talk to one another one-on-one.
Good.
But we are not suggesting that the move to amend constitutional amendment will cure disease.
Well, and one of the things that we said in our last session, and I think Andre did a good job of sort of reiterating it when he started, is one, we think we need a movement. One, to get this done. But even if we get this done, as I was saying before in the last session, if we got this amendment tomorrow, nothing would change because there's not a movement behind it. Which is why we were looking at corporate personhood timeline and the fact that corporations get their rights from judges and from precedent, but people get their rights and their expanded rights from struggle and movements. So if we pass this tomorrow, nothing would happen. It is not the fix. It is a step towards the fix, but we need a real broad-based movement to get a true democracy in the United States.
So you had a comment? Or
I had a question. I don't know if this is, you limit what you can answer or whatever, which I agree with you, that's fine, because I'm a latecomer here anyway. But these corporations do things like these oil spills all over, really. And these are very, I don't know, disastrous to humankind. But the people that run the corporations, who obviously were responsible for this, people working there, running it, whatever, never are charged criminally. How does that work?
Well, that's not exactly on the same page, but it's just sort of a symbol of the type of society we live in. We had a few people here last time who wanted us to talk a bit more about the United States not being a democracy but being an oligarchy. And that's true. But the tools of the oligarchy are the corporations. So it's all intertwined. They have, one of the principal reasons that these people don't come up on criminal charges is mostly because they're presidents of limited liability companies. So with that limited liability, they can't be sent to jail because they can just say, I didn't do this, our corporation did this. And as we know, you can't send a corporation to jail. So it's connected, it's part of the same problem, but it's just sort of a symbol of the overall oligarchy that we live in.
And I see your hand, Andre, so let me just answer directly. I've got Dre and I've got Oliver, but here would be how I would answer the question. Here's how I would answer that question, which is a district attorney, or better yet, an attorney general, right now could initiate a action to revoke a corporate charter or revoke a certificate of authority to do business on the basis of violations of laws. There's not the political will to do it. I read for Attorney General of Texas on the Green Party ticket pledging to revoke the charters of corporations that routinely violate health, safety, public health, and environmental protection laws. It's going to take a movement, right? And that movement, it's not like, and this is the other thing, our movement at Move to Men is not focused on just a constitutional amendment. We want to encourage people to engage in electoral politics and vote for candidates who are pledging to revoke corporate charters and to make new laws. I mean, we need to engage all of the tactics at our disposal in this nonviolent revolutionary movement. I've got Andre, and then I had Oliver. Thank you. Andre.
Yeah, no, I just think, if in the law corporations are people, then they shouldn't have that limited liability. Somebody's, it's got to be a human being.
Yeah,
so I don't know. Maybe that could be a quicker way to. I don't know.
If you think of one, I know. I'm sorry, that Oliver, then Mark.
That's a good point.
I understand that you want to have a grassroots people power movement, and then you just mentioned that you're encouraging people to vote for candidates that align with these principles. My understanding of the U.S. system is, especially in Washington, is that big corporations have a lot of money put into lobbyists that have a lot of influence on politicians all the way up to the president. And I'm wondering, how do you counteract that influence?
Go ahead. Please, go ahead.
So
we got a teacher here.
Yeah.
Come on up there, Mark.
Yeah, so the whole point was to take the corporate from this side to this side. What does that do? It gets them into the subordinate and the duties and the roles, right? So once you get back here, you can start applying the rules that say corporation, you can only donate $50 to a presidential election or no dollars to a presidential election, right? You take it, you can start to control how they're spending billions of dollars and trying to manage the laws. This amendment doesn't change the laws. The amendment is the foundation on which the laws are built, right? So you get the foundation set correctly, and then you can start applying the laws and getting them where you need them to be to achieve some of the ends where we really want to get to. But right now, we're broke.
Well, and to further answer your question, it's people power. I mean, one of the reasons that the Tea Party holds so much sway in our Congress right now is because the more moderate Republicans, if those still exist, are scared of losing their job. And don't get me wrong, Democrats and Republicans are all bought. But they still recognize they can be voted out. And to some degree, I've been saying more and more, David always says a lot of people are under the misapprehension that democracy is politics. I mean, that voting is politics. Voting is democracy. And I usually say, democracy is what happens between elections.
Yeah.
And we need to get the focus away from just voting and have people put real pressure on their elected representatives in a number of different ways. One of the things that Dre didn't mention is another initiative we started this year called Pledge to Ammend, where we're trying to put pressure because we've passed about 500 resolutions around the country, which Dre mentioned, and we've been on the ballot 28 times and won by 70 or 80% each time, with people who agree that we need an amendment that says corporations are not people and money is not free speech. But our recognition is we're not going to get there with the Congress that we have right now. So one of the things that we have been doing is trying to encourage people to get into electoral politics and elect different people, sure. But we don't think we're really going to get there electorally, but it is one prong of our strategy. And Pledge to Ammend tries to put pressure on local representatives and state representatives to get them on record as to whether or not they support an amendment to the Constitution. Because we know local representatives move up to the state representatives move up to federal, and we can do the work right now of trying to change the makeup within the system while continuing to do community organizing and movement building outside of the system. Because even though we have a plan, there's no real magic bullet. It's like this is what we think is going to happen. Like we can call for. We can use the pressure of calling for a constitutional convention for the states to get Congress to act, but if Congress doesn't act, we can call a constitutional convention. But we want to be there with a multi-pronged strategy because there's so much money in Washington, because there's no way we can just lobby the people who are there now and get them to change their minds because they're
We got an open stack. The floor is completely open. So I got you.
Yeah, okay.
Anybody else?
Right here?
Go ahead, Don.
Yeah, okay, good, thanks, yeah. Yeah, and I was just going to say that I think you did an excellent job of describing the problem, first of all. And when somebody does a really good job of describing an issue or a problem, I think they probably got a good handle on the solution, too, Got a lot of thinking and a lot of work on it. And I really appreciated your anecdotes about LA, what your challenges were there and your successes. And I'm trying then to identify with this and what can I do? What can we do? And you're talking about several things, but petitioning the local, community like the city government or something like that to actually sign on. It was an interesting idea, and I wonder if you could elaborate on that. And then some other ideas that you had, something that we could do, teaching, but what can we do locally? And again, I don't want to say that I didn't hear what you already said, but I'd like to just have you maybe elaborate on that some more.
I'm going to invite Jennifer to answer the question.
Well, I just wanted to add to the question because I said that you were talking about petitioning the local government to start these resolutions, and I want to know what about when you're met with resistance, like we were in Leelanau County when the Northern Michigan group were. Anyway, they didn't even want to hear Lou. I mean, I think they kind of put the pressure on to at least hear what they had to say, but they certainly didn't pass it. And I don't know, I guess besides just the petitioning, what do you do when you meet this resistance? Some strategies for that, I guess.
Well, a lot of times, and I think the story I told in the last session was from Santa Monica, which is, I would even say a suburb of LA. There's so many cities in LA. But in LA we call it the People's Republic of Santa Monica because it's usually fairly progressive place where they do a lot of things for people. And a few members of our LA Move to Ammend group went in conjunction with some members from the Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund to present two separate resolutions but together to the Santa Monica City Council. One was a Move to Ammend resolution calling for an amendment to the Constitution that says corporations are not people, money is not speech. And another was a binding ordinance from CELDEF which recognized the rights of nature within the jurisdiction of Santa Monica. And when they first went up, the CELDEF ordinance, which is actually binding, won, and our Move to Ammend resolution lost. And this was a bit of a surprise because our Los Angeles resolution went through the Los Angeles City Council in December of 2011, and we were more paranoid about that because there's a corporate lobby group in LA called the Central City Association that pays everybody and is really closely aligned with the Chamber of Commerce, and we were like, is this going to happen? But In LA, it was unanimous, 11-0 to 2. In Santa Monica, there was work to do. You know, sometimes it doesn't happen the first time, and sometimes it might not happen for years. LA was a bit of a fluke for us because one of our city council people, who is now our mayor, Eric Garcetti, had a resolution in the pipeline. But with Santa Monica, what they had to go do, one, is wait for another election and get some people out of there, but then actively lobby the elected representatives on the merits of this type of amendment. And frankly, I feel like what actually helped a lot was sort of the growing number of Move to Amend resolutions being passed across the country, and the growing number of people signing on, and specifically the fact that our amendment was introduced in Congress this year by Mark Pocan and Rick Nolan on February 14th. So it's actually in the pike. It's not just something that we're talking wide-eyed about. But sometimes you have to go back repeatedly. It actually came up for a vote this year and won in Santa Monica after a gap of 14 months. But before the vote, and I mentioned this in the earlier session, one member of the Santa Monica City Council, who was closely aligned with the Chamber of Commerce, wrote this 13-page retraction that was really vitriolic, and was like, we can't do this, and then business won't be able to do this, and the free market, and blah, 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 and it was all bullshit, basically. Easily refutable stuff that you could just sort of direct people to portions of our website to fill out. But I feel like sometimes you just have to do the extra work with the elected representatives, which is why the Pledge to Amend initiative that we started this year will be a useful tool once we add more and more names to the list, especially once they become more and more high profile. We're going for local and state representatives to get them on record, and the more reps we have in a particular state or a particular region, the stronger you are when you go in and talk to your people. I mean, we already have our amendment in Congress on the federal level. We have the support of a lot of states that have passed statewide resolutions, 500 separate resolutions, and that keeps building on that. But one of the biggest things for us in LA was our ability to show that the stakeholders in the area / voters who could vote people out supported this. And that's one of the reasons why in the last session I mentioned that the first prong of our strategy was to try to get people to do ballot initiatives, because ballot initiatives basically show other elected representatives who might vote for or against the people who support it. Plus, as Dre mentioned earlier, ballot initiatives are a really great organizing tool, because you get to talk to people when you're gathering signatures to get on the ballot. Then you get to talk to people to explain the issue when you're on the ballot. And then even the people you didn't talk to see the question in front of them on election day. So it's out. And when we've actually had it on the ballot, it's passed by 70 or 80% in liberal and conservative areas. But sometimes it just takes time. The other thing that we rolled out this year is the We the People Listen project. And that basically has people go into either their own neighborhood or neighborhoods where they don't have as many connections. Like a lot of our affiliates need to reach out to more people of color or to more young people. But go into those areas and ask those people questions about what they think about public power, and sort of, feel out what people in the neighborhood really care about, and then use that information to recruit other people, and then take that information back to either your council or your elected representatives.
Daniel, could you speak up a little bit?
Any future conversations, I don't want you to try to...
Well, no, I can, but I am done.
And so I'm going to try to answer the specific questions. Like, what can you do right away? But to contextualize it. I believe Malcolm X was right. If you want revolution, it's either the ballot or the bullet. Since I'm a nonviolent revolutionary, I don't believe that we can use the bullet to actually affect change. So I do believe ultimately this is going to have to engage electoral politics, which is to say, Jennifer, when you describe your phenomenon, let's just acknowledge that those elected officials need to either have their minds changed or their seats changed.
I agree.
Straight up. Like, people who are at Occupy, I believe, need to either start running for office themselves or finding other folks. It's not that the only thing that we should be doing, but it is a thing that we should be doing. Right? Like, if you really want to repeat that, it's not the only thing that we should be doing, but it is a thing that we should be doing. Because I want to lift up Jerome Scott, my comrade, who often says this: most Americans think that voting is democracy. Now, they are wrong. But if 185 million Americans believe that engaging at the ballot box is where politics take place, any movement that actually takes itself seriously has got to engage at that level. It's a front of struggle. Just as surely as locking down a pipeline is a front of struggle. Just as surely as trying to pressure and engage in a shutdown or a general strike is there are different tactics that are different fronts of struggle. So it's not either or, it should be both and. And now, with that context, I want to even go further and say, you know what, here's a question. How many of y'all have a Facebook page? Even if you don't like that you have a Facebook page.
Yeah, good.
Yeah, you got a lot of their hands going. Here's the thing. If everybody who just raised your hands would use your status update to just say, I just signed up with www.movetoamend.org.
Good.
Please check it out and hit send.
Good.
I can tell you this, from the miracle of how social media operates, probably 300 to 500 eyeballs will at least learn about Move to Amend that don't already know about it. Will we build a movement that way? No. Will we begin to break down? I see your hand, Joe. I see your hand, Ann. I'm just pointing out that if y'all would do that, we had 306,000 people because of people like you. But like we've never been covered by the corporate media.
Right.
Our budget is like peanuts, right? Peanuts compared to the nonprofit industrial complex. We're growing because ordinary people are hearing the truth that we are telling and a strategy that makes sense where they can begin to engage. The second thing you could do, so your Facebook page right now. The second thing you can do, an old-fashioned letter to the editor that just takes the short thing that Dre gave you, and then I would ask you to include, check out www.movetoamend.org in that letter, so that letters to the editor are the third most read section of a newspaper. Yes. It's an amazing way to actually get to it. The third thing you can do is call in talk radio, especially conservative talk radio, and learn some talking points to talk about the American Revolution and the Founding Fathers, and if you're comfortable engaging that, because I don't want to just organize progressives, I want to delegitimize the right-wing echo chamber, right? So those are things we can do right now that don't take learning what Daniel and I have presented to you. And there are more of those. The more you get involved in Move to Amend, the more. And most of these ideas are all of these ideas are on their website and more. I'm going to do one more round. I got Joe, Don, Jamie. Anybody else? So I'm going to go to Stan because we haven't heard from Stan at all. So I'm going to go Stan first. Stan.
Oh, I get to be first.
You do.
You brought up Chamber of Commerce, and that for people like us and relatively small communities. I used to work in Los Angeles. That was one chamber. Now we're in Traverse City. There's 70,000 people in the county, 14,000 people in the city. Chamber of Commerce is really powerful. Do you have some strategic things you do with chambers?
I think there are things that we support. Like, not all chambers are the same. Like, there are some chambers, the Chamber of Commerce, I don't know what they call them, affiliates or whatever, but there's some that actually work for their community and actually look out for things. But by and large, one of the partner organizations that helped found Move to Amend, Liberty Tree, has this campaign called shutthechamber.org, and it provides a list of alternatives to the Chamber of Commerce that are business organizations that actually work for the community or for the environment. And there's a campaign to get smaller businesses to recognize that the Chamber of Commerce, much like the farm bills and the government subsidies, and the Chamber of Commerce works for Fortune 500 companies, basically. They get smaller companies to join and pay fees, but they do not look out for them in any way, shape, or form. But I would recommend going to shutthechamber.org to look for more info on that.
And even better, because that's a campaign against the national chamber, but for what local businesses can do, locally owned, independently operated business, because, like, screw Wall Street, but I'm all about Main Street commerce, right? Mm-hmm. So if you want to actually support local businesses, the single best place is the American Independent Business Alliance, AMIBA.net, and that's the place, Stan, that I would recommend this year. Because the Shut the Chamber campaign is more militant, like we're going up against the national chamber, which does suck, as Daniel said, but local merchants, Amoeba, AMIBA.net, stands for American Independent Business Alliance. So I've got Joe.
Okay. Also, just a little add-on. When you mentioned the status updates, one thing that I found that was extremely effective, and I learned when I started, myself and a couple gals started the March Against Monsanto action, was that if you use, let's say, a big news, let's say in Malaysia, some guy did a world record hot dog eating contest, and it made the papers around the world. Well, take that issue, like I would have twisted it and said Monsanto, March Against Monsanto does not support GMOs in Malaysia. Well, because that was the big news of the day. Well, now when they Google, it's not only going to be the big news of the day, but now you got the March Against Monsanto right there on top.
Good.
And it's those little tricks like that, and also a lot of pages, people, too much information. Every 10 minutes they're putting in a new link and a new this and new that. It's really important if you go ahead and when you start it up, you're short, you're concise to the point. You have to get their, it's a teaser. You have to get their attention, and once they do, I wouldn't suggest putting on new links any more than maybe 3 to 4 hours apart. Anything sooner than that, and people just get bombarded by all the information and noise and don't really pay attention to it. But if it's enough to where it can make them think, and then that sort of helps get the ball rolling a little bit.
Thank you.
Yeah, name's Dan, but that's cool.
No, I'm sorry.
Yeah, cool. Anyway, thanks. I wanted to address what the gal said over there. She had a hard time hearing. And actually, I think you've been doing a pretty good job. I was afraid of that because you were real quiet over here and you spoke up very well. But anyway, I'm going to put this video online and I'm going to enhance the audio so you'll be able to hear it. But here's the damn thing. For instance, I was at the NATO thing in Chicago a year ago. There was this gal who came up and talked, Afghani for Peace gal. Beautiful. It was the best speech I heard all year long. And my camera crapped out, so I thought, well, I see cameras everywhere. I'll go home and I'll be able to find it online. I could not. And I don't know if Google or something censors that shit, but the only thing I could see was the part that you could see on the mainstream media. I couldn't find her video until finally I contacted her, actually. I found her name and got a video. So I want to tell you right now, this video, I got all of her talking. The earlier thing, what I heard today was very important. Everybody should hear it. I'm going to enhance the audio. I'm going to put it online. I'll tell you where it's going to be. It's going to be on Occupy Muskegon's Facebook page. Mm-hmm. Occupy Muskegon's Facebook page. That's where it'll be. Mm-hmm. Cool.
Don't hate the corporate media. Become the people's media.
Right. Excellent.
Jamie.
I just have 2 points. One, I want to know why you guys have not incorporated as a nonprofit to be able to get donations to enhance your movement. And the second thing is, if you say that we should, people in Occupy should start applying for public positions or going into public positions, is there a way to do that without getting involved in the money or the need for money in order to have a campaign? In other words, play that same game in order to get into a public position.
Well, I'll just start answering your second question first. One of the easiest and one of the best ways to get into the political system and get yourself known is local politics. And if you engage in local politics, oftentimes you don't need nearly as much money as you would on the state or federal level, but you do get your name out there. And a lot of people are like, whoa, local politics, well, what can I do? A lot of times it's where you can be most effective in your community, because the local decisions to affect people in the community directly. I would just want to reference something that basically the corporate cabal came up with around the same time that Alex started in the 70s, but it was the Powell Memo. And if you don't know the Powell Memo, it was written by Lewis Powell, who later became the Supreme Court Justice. But it was basically outlining that strategy. And their strategy was to fill up the city councils and to fill up the school boards and to fill up all of the local level positions to get really pro-corporate agenda through. And from there, they just went on to state and federal. And that's, it's a strategy that worked. I hate to steal from their playbook, but that's sort of what we
So you're basically saying one step at a time.
And in terms of your first question, we've actually already filed papers to become a nonprofit.
We are a project of a nonprofit right now. I see a bunch of hands go up. The stack was already closed, but what I'm going to do, I saw 3 hands that we haven't heard from at all. So I'm going to exercise facilitator's privilege and actually ask if we can hear from Bruce. Then at the back, is it Cecilia, and then the gentleman here, because we haven't heard from those voices at all. Daniel and I are here for the rest of the day, so we'll continue the conversation. But again, even though we had already closed the stack and we're over, I'm going to actually ask that Bruce and Cecilia, and I'm sure, please don't ask us a question, but if you want to make a comment to the group before we end up, I want to open that space available. Bruce?
Yeah, I appreciate that. And one thing, I tried to push a ballot initiative last election, and that was the second initiative I was kind of more hands-on in. But we had an amazing campaign. We had probably like 200 volunteers that were out there every day doing actions, creating visibility. We had a great amount of outreach in our community. We raised around $40,000. And it was an initiative to bring public power to Olympia, Washington. It's a county-wide initiative, which is something that you can do. You don't have to do state initiatives. You can do county, town initiatives. And the most that had ever been spent on an election in our county for a county-wide election of any kind was $110,000. We raised $40,000. We thought we were doing okay. The electric company set up a front group, and they spent $680,000 just on the front group to defeat this. And they did. They ended up winning. They won 60-40 though. And so there's something, people put out statistics a lot that like 90% or more of elections are won by the person who raises the most money.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that doesn't necessarily add up to cost involved. I think no matter what, when you're dealing with our electric company, they were able to basically call everybody in the county, figure out what their personal position is. I mean, it was almost that ability, and then create a customized message to appeal to them, to make them not vote for the initiative. It was almost that level of sophistication that they could do. But we still got 40% of the vote, though. And one thing that I feel strongly about is that what we didn't do and what we should have done, though, is to make it is to not be a one-time issue around this ballot initiative. And so our group, didn't have a plan for continuing. And I would have liked to have seen us run a different initiative the next year. Even if we were originally about pushing for public power, which is so important, everybody should look into their state's issues and try and get public power. But another thing is that we should have taken it and just to exercise the group, to exercise our muscle in elections, to be involved in campaigns, just even if it's not your choice issue, even if you're waiting a year before you run your initiative campaign. Be involved and have your people, work that muscle, that political muscle.
I just wanted to give a point of clarification. There were two candidates, Occupy candidates. One was George Martinez, who ran for Congress. Unfortunately, he ran as a Democrat in New York, and now we currently have Jelani Mafarishi, who was George Martinez's campaign manager, who is also running as a Democrat for the New York City Council. So far we've had two. Hopefully this one will win.
Our Occupy group actually got somebody elected to the city council. There was 2 seats open. Our candidate got more votes than every other candidate that was in the race. And there was unusual aspects of like this crazy weird Facebook page we had about him and the Bears, California and the Bears and all that. And, it was just like so weird that, I don't know, people must have just went,
what community?
Money, but he took all the votes. Now, on our city council, to make that agenda, we need 3 people. So theoretically, if we could put 3 people on the city council, we could start setting whatever agenda we wanted to set.
Where?
This is in Monterey, California.
Wow.
So it feels to me like that is just about as perfect a place to start.
I have a beautiful idea.
Let's all thank Dre for being a teacher.
Yeah, thanks. You did a good job.
Thank you so much. We'll be around. Thank you, Mark, also for being a teacher.
Yeah.
And I want to encourage you all to become teachers of Move to Men
cool.
as we go forward.